Welcome back to the show, everybody. Today, super excited to be joined by Parker and Patrick from Telcoin. Telcoin's been building at the intersection of telecom and blockchain with a bold mission for years, turning billions of mobile devices into financial access points. Telcoin's been laying the groundwork, building partnerships with telecoms, securing licenses across the U.S. There's a pending bank coming up pretty soon in the U.S. too, which is awesome. Now positioning themselves right at the middle of massive industry shifts such as tokenization, stablecoins, and even the GSMA document that the Telcoin community flagged me on. So I'm super excited to get into the weeds with Parker and Patrick here today. As we kick off for an intro, for people new to Telcoin, in broad strokes, what problem are you guys trying to solve in the simplest terms? And I'll start with Patrick here.
Yeah, again, my name is Patrick Gerhardt. I'm president of banking operations for Telcoin, helping develop the bank here in the state of Nebraska. I should say the digital asset bank here in the state of Nebraska. Biggest thing we're trying to solve is getting people online on the blockchain, trading crypto, trading stablecoin specifically in a safe and sound manner, not just within the state of Nebraska, United States, but all across the world. What we're doing here is trying to make it not only safe, but also cost effective for everyday people to really send money in a fast manner across multiple jurisdictions. That really kind of goes against what the current financial model is in banking that's going on right now. So we're trying to make money transmission safer, faster, and cheaper for everybody to utilize it.
I want to go over to Parker here, and I know it's not too often that I get to kind of talk to OG ecosystems in this space. You guys have been around for years. This space changes almost on a daily basis, it seems like. And I would love maybe, Parker, if you could just tell us, how the vision of Telcoin has kind of evolved over the years, and where you guys are kind of at right now.
Sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate your time. And so I'm Parker Span, EVP of Strategy at Telcoin. And so Telcoin was founded by Paul Nooner, and effectively he came out of a firm that was focused on providing fraud management systems for the entire telecom industry, sat on the fraud board of the GSMA. And so when he sold that business in 2016, after it was working with 38 different mobile network operators around the world to secure their fraud backends, he realized there's this really, really synergistic opportunity with telecoms to be the validator set for what we call the Internet of Money. And so we're trying to unlock the Internet of Money, which means storing, sending, exchanging your money on the internet at the same costs as data with instant global execution, settlement, and delivery for independent from third parties and ultimately connected, unlike the existing fragmented blockchain ecosystem and the super expensive and exclusive foreign exchange market where money's incredibly expensive for everyday users to interact with on the internet. So we're solving that problem. And so it's evolved over time from this blockchain network standard coordinated by telecoms, which is very much still in line with what we're doing in our mission, to adding a vertical blockchain finance ecosystem, which also includes a digital asset bank in the US, a global basket of stablecoins with interconnected bank rails that are regulated and licensed, and then this incredibly important digital asset bank in the US with this first regulated bank issued stablecoin and capacity to tokenize the entire financial system on chain.
So I think it's really interesting, and I think one of the, I guess, from my standpoint, being in crypto since like late 2016, is seems like we've made all this adoption, but like still in crypto, it's kind of this battle between ecosystems, and it's like recycled community or recycled liquidity and all this stuff. And I think like the low hanging fruit is like, why aren't we tackling the billions of users out there that are using cell phones that may not even have be tied into the financial system or the banking system? It seems like it's kind of a no-brainer, but I'm sure that that's not necessarily the easiest route for a lot of these networks to accomplish. But you guys have chosen to go that route, is kind of like tackling financial inclusion at kind of the telecom level, which is interesting. And can you maybe just broaden out, like, because I'm sure some of the stats or some of just the how many people have cell phones but might not have bank accounts and things like that. Why you guys look at kind of telecom rails as kind of being the killer app for financial inclusion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's two or three telecoms in every country, so they're the most distributed in the world. And in a lot of cases, they're actually owned partially by the central bank because they're so critical to local economic development. And so there's two or three in the every country in the world. They actually operate networks as a service. That's what they do. They, data packets on the internet, they process those. Now we just think inserting them into a blockchain, a distributed ledger, makes the most sense. They have the network infrastructure, they have the last mile payment connectivity to users, including all of their data, 7 billion users globally. And the way we look at it is the whole world's actually unbanked. We're all using brokers and intermediaries to interact with our money like mailmen instead of email. And so we're here to effectively solve that last mile of payment connectivity, build a real institutionally aligned ecosystem globally that's a secure blockchain, and ultimately unlock the internet for money markets and every digital good and service in the world.
So one of the things that's interesting to me is, and I'll give a shout out to the Telcoin community and thank you for reaching out, and we kind of put this together on the back end of that. I like will randomly do deep dives from my personal YouTube still, and I stumbled across the GSMA document here, and I'll pull it up here. Um, so this is telco stablecoin development, and we work in a bunch of different ecosystems. Hedera and a few others, and I saw Hedera in here, and I saw Telcoin as well, but I was not familiar with some of the stuff that I saw in here. So I don't know if I can do a control F, but there's like ESDRs, which is electronic special drawing rights, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy huge. The IMF and the special drawing rights and all this stuff. And then thankfully the Telcoin community was like, dude, this is like literally all Telcoin like verbiage and acronyms and stuff. Can you maybe give like a broad overview of what ESDR is and why, from the jurisdictional level, it's so important to have kind of stable coins at the jurisdictional level, what that allows you to potentially do for things like remittances and other things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the problem that we're solving is you have, this disconnected blockchain ecosystem that can be the new platform for how money moves on the internet. But the problem is that you need local bank accounts tied to local digital currencies, or what we call digital cash, because it's kind of like handing a $20 bill over the internet, the equivalent digitally of doing that. And so, you really, in order to unlock this internet of money that we're so focused on, you need to have basically free in and out rails that are regulated local into local currencies to enable foreign exchange to happen so that people in, let's say, Kenya can access dollars. You need that to be as instant as free as possible. So you have to unlock this local stablecoin rail in order to enable them to exchange their Kenya shilling for us. That's our ticker symbol for EUSD, and then use any of the US banking products, or just hold dollars. It's a huge product, of course, with a ton of demand internationally. And so, yeah, we're trying to effectively connect all the telecoms to the same network and stablecoin standard to enable this internet of money, or a foreign exchange market on blockchain that ultimately is a 100x improvement on the existing financial system.
So, I mean, I guess that brings up an interesting point too, where you have essentially kind of all of these jurisdictional stable coins. Um, I'm curious, like your guys' take, because there's got to be kind of different jurisdictions are certainly at different points of adoption of the technology. So when you look at something like the Genius Act and that kind of, at least giving us some sort of clarity in the United States, um, what does it mean for you guys to kind of be positioned where you're positioned and kind of taking that forward thinking thought leadership and doing the work and putting boots on the ground? And, because I'm sure every different nation that I look at up here is in a totally different place with where they're at. But what does that give you guys as an opportunity, I guess?
Yeah, so basically, the way that you make a really good point. Each of these countries is sovereign. They own all of their own rules, and they all issue their own currencies. And blockchains, can be either totally prohibited in some countries, or really sort of they have a very strong forward-thinking approach. What we've done is we've created 21 different subsidiaries around the world because we've recognized that you need to have boots on the ground in each of these jurisdictions. And so, you really, it's very difficult to compare one country to another because they're all so much different. But what we do know is that You need to work closely with the local regulators and legislators in the case of what we did in Nebraska, where we wrote the second crypto banking law in the US. And you have to really sort of inch your way towards getting to what will ultimately be the new platform for money on the internet. And so it's going to take time, but it is absolutely a prerequisite to unlock these local markets because otherwise you're running a really complex trade finance book to give people the money that they want by giving them, let's say, you're trying to cash in from a US company, someone in, a country in Africa. Well, that's going to be really expensive if you don't have a local bank account, right? And so you have to figure out the local rules and laws. But what we're seeing is, and part of our approach has been to basically try and create this digital asset bank in the US that can be the standard for how you do crypto banking globally. And as we get these stablecoin licenses around the world, ultimately scale this bank around the world so it has separate departments and really be the leader in crypto banking around the world.
Yeah, I would love, Patrick, if you could maybe just talk a little bit about with where you guys are at right now with the Norfolk Bank, the Telcoin Bank in Norfolk, what that represents for you guys, what that opens up. I know Parker went through some of it, but I'm sure this is kind of your passion part here. So I would love if you can maybe walk us through and maybe expand a little bit. It'd be great.
Yeah, so I mean, just a little background on why we're here and how we got here. Back in 2021, our CEO, Paul Nooner, met up with his former college roommate at Notre Dame, then State Senator Mike Flood and current Congressman Mike Flood from Nebraska. And Paul was looking at coming to the United States to establish something in regards to crypto, some type of bank of whatnot. And he immediately looked at the Wyoming charter, what's going on in Wyoming. And Mike, like I said, was a state senator at the time, was like, well, you could do that, or why don't you come here in Nebraska? I could, put this together. So then State Senator Mike Flood put together the Nebraska Financial Innovation Act, which allowed digital asset depository institutions to operate and be regulated in the state of Nebraska. Once that happened, which was kind of funny because it passed on its first time through. Most legislation in the United States, regardless of states, it takes maybe two or three times for people to wrap their heads around something, especially something as new as crypto, digital assets. I mean, most of the banking industry, most of the finance industry, still kind of was very skeptical of it back in the time. Back then, it was very kind of a niche area of finance that nobody was really comfortable touching. But Nebraska passed it on the first go round, so that passed. And then the Nebraska Department of Banking and Finance took those rules on. They put together the examination manuals. They established their own department. They have a digital asset depository institution department dealing strictly with digital asset depository institutions, not just traditional banks. So once that started going, we put our application together. It took a couple years because, again, nothing like this has been done before. Going back and forth with the department, we finally got full acceptance of our application last September. On February of this year, we got conditional approval, which we are cleaning up right now. Basically going through just leftover things, cap raise, positions being filled, documentation, policies, procedures ready to go, so we can hopefully open fairly soon, hopefully in the next couple months. But that's kind of just the basic process of kind of where we're at, why we're here, why Nebraska. Since then, Nebraska, the Department of Banking and Finance, I am traditionally a former banker, but I will tell you, most bankers will not praise regulators, but the Nebraska Department of Banking and Finance has been very, very good to work with. They are very eager to make Nebraska into something in the crypto world, not just a place for people to domicile as a bank, but in regards to the rules and regulations, they are ahead of the curve. For not just in the United States, but I think globally in regards to how to regulate this industry. Because one thing I will say, this is faster, it is less expensive, but it's also safer. And the regulatory environment right now is very pro what we're doing. And to really understand the United States financial system, you have to understand the regulatory environment that we are coming into, which is very strong. It is very robust. And to really get everyday people involved in this, not just folks like us who've been in crypto for a long time, but we want, your grandparents, your parents, aunts and uncles, older people who are still skeptical of it, are not necessarily wanting to jump onto a third party app, a fintech that really has no banking connections to send, thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars of their own money into crypto. What's a place that they feel safe and comfortable at? Their traditional bank. and with the ability for traditional banks and new banks to form and to have the same regulatory environment that a traditional bank would have is huge on the psyche of the everyday consumer, which like I said earlier, I believe, this is a very easy way to get everyday people into crypto, getting them on the blockchain, realizing how safe it is, how fast it is, how less expensive it is than ACHing, wiring. Western Union money across, borders is, it costs a lot of money. This is a fraction of the cost. It's definitely a fraction of the time. And at the end of the day, it is still safe and sound. And now that we are going the regulatory route where we're trying to become a regulated digital asset depository institution, I think that not only will help our industry out, but it'll help the general public out getting in here in a safe and sound manner.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too. I mean, as far as like onboarding new users, I think we've seen strides made over the past couple of years in crypto as far as like things like account abstraction and all these other things that like nobody outside of crypto is ever going to talk about that because nobody's going to care. But at the end of the day, I think stable coins are probably one of the best forms of actually eliminating some of the red tape, because as soon as, like with the Genius Act, as soon as people see stable coins and are using stable coins and they realize that they're stable, but they're using crypto, it becomes that much easier to kind of bridge out into some of the other things within crypto because you're comfortable. I also think the mobile phone is kind of where it needs to be. Like, I don't think we're going to be in a society 10, 20 years from now where everybody's like, oh, I'm going to write down my private key and now I'm going to download this and I'm going to go do this. And because nobody cares. If we would have gotten to that point since 2009 with Bitcoin, we would already be there. Like, yes, it's going to get better and stuff, but I really think we need to like get crypto and get the technology to a point where it's just injected in people's everyday lives. And like, as to your point, Patrick, what they're doing is either faster or cheaper or whatever, but it's already integrated kind of on the back end. Parker, I want to ask you, because we've seen a lot of different kind of wins in this space. Like I even saw today, I think Wisconsin launched a stable coin or something. But how do you see Telcoin coexisting with, I don't even know if CBDCs is like super crazy relevant anymore, but CBDCs, stable coins, do you look at them as competitors or complements to what you guys are building with
Right.
within Telcoin?
They're very much complements. There's so much, it's so much different than the existing world of money because you have in the existing world, you have these really closed sort of, old guys in the room, sort of dynamic where that's the network structure is literally just 20 banks control 80% of the largest market in the world for which is money. And so every time a new bank launches a stablecoin, that enables us to provide liquidity with their stablecoin and ultimately access their entire user base and vice versa. So what we want is fluid movement of money between each of these different ecosystems. And if you look at any of the large banks around the world, we want to be interacting with their customers. We want to enable a connected internet that is free from the walled gardens that we use today for money. And so having liquidity with these stablecoins is very important, both from the perspective of adoption and expansion of this really small pie of the world that we're trying to grow with everybody else. Um, but it's also incredibly important because it gives us legitimacy. And at the end of the day, we can work with this entire new universe of stablecoin products to improve the efficiency of our own products. If there's a dollar trading against a dollar on chain, let's say in our case we have the EUSD dollar, and then it trades with, let's say, an EJPM token. We want to get as much liquidity between those $2 as possible, both because it'll ensure that those dollar pegs stay very close and solid. It'll enable new forms of yield for both user bases, including both companies, and it'll enable us to seamlessly and fluidly interact with both customer bases, offer a global product set for everyone to access, similar to the internet, but for finance and banking and money and everything else that comes with that.
I think one of the biggest shifts over the past like year or so, and for those that have been paying attention, like I know you guys were down at the DC Blockchain Summit too, and that thing has just grown like out of control. Like the amount of huge heavy hitters that are at these kind of
Mhm.
events at this point is crazy. I remember looking at the DC blockchain summit guests, and huge shout out to the Digital Chamber. Those guys have been killing it for years for blockchain lobbying and advocacy. A few years ago, I mean, there was maybe 40, 50 guests. Like you couldn't, it was like infinite scroll whenever you were on the DC Blockchain Summit site. And I know that you guys were down there. I mean, just maybe broad thoughts on the state of where we're at in the United States. I mean, you guys are one of the entities that are, you've been here for years and you've chosen to continue trying to build and innovate in the States. And finally, we're getting some clarity. It's got to be a little bit of like a vindication moment. But what are your thoughts on like crypto in the US and where we're at, I guess, where we kind of need to be from a leadership standpoint? And yeah.
Yeah, no, more than happy to. So right now, ever since the election last November and the new administration coming in, that's been very pro crypto. You've seen a huge influx of interest, money, not just in the United States but outside the United States into the crypto realm. We're in a very much of a gold rush time for our industry, and it's not just at the national level; it's at state level. People are talking all over about how they can integrate cryptocurrency, digital assets into their financial systems. The Genius Act, Stable Acts, everything that's gone through Congress this year has been a good, huge step forward, especially in regards to stable coins. Again, this is just a start. Okay. Like this is going to take time. They still got to come up with the rules and regulations on kind of how they're going to deal with this. The OCC, the Federal Reserve, FDIC, they've got to get in there. They got to understand how they're going to regulate this on their end. So this is a huge step forward. Again, first time these bills were going through really, and they passed and they got signed. Like this is huge. Like this rarely happens for anything, let alone in the financial industry. Because I mean, the United States financial industry, it's the largest, it's the strongest, but it's also old and in a ways kind of archaic. It takes time, but it is so large that you can't just shock the system on a regular basis. That's why it takes forever. So something like this, where stable coins, cryptocurrency is coming in and really seeing major mainstream play is huge. But again, this is just a start. There's a lot to still do. There's different areas of crypto. Stable coins are just one particular area that people are getting into, and it's as you said, it's the easiest way to one of the easiest ways to get into. It's safe. It's backed 1 to 1 by whatever currency, in our case the US dollar. So it's really easy to get into. But there's many other areas of the cryptocurrency world that still is yet to even be touched upon. And I think this is just kind of the start of getting that ball rolling. I mean, this isn't going away. Whoever, future administrations, this is going to be so ingrained into us at this point that I don't see anything really pulling anything back in terms of the progress that we have in the crypto community have made this far, at least on, a policy level. I don't see anything, that's just going to, tomorrow it's just all going to go away. We've come too far. The United States government's come too far. It's by the time things get rolling really well, this is going to be a part of our daily lives, not just ours, but everybody's, and I think it's going to happen a lot faster than people realize.
I want to ask Parker or Patrick, whichever one of you guys. I always find it interesting, and I think it's awesome to kind of see, because I think crypto is still, a lot of crypto is kind of still like the Wild West, where it's like if something happens, I have nobody to go to. And I was scrolling down through your guys' Twitter today, and I noticed that the Telcoin app, there's a support team, which I think is pretty cool. And I mean, it's kind of like, and it seems like a little thing, but I think it's a very important thing to be able to have outreach as we onboard new users into the space. Like I told a story to, I had Lehman on from the Hedera ecosystem like last week. And I was like, just telling a broad story before we recorded that, like I was talking to my aunt a couple of years ago and I said the word ecosystem. She's like, what do you do in crypto? I'm like, I work with a bunch of ecosystems and we do. And she's like, what is an ecosystem? And I'm like, wow, I have a lot more work to do if like the word ecosystem is hiccuping. But yeah, talk about like that customer support and how important that is for you guys within the application.
In order to go mainstream, crypto needs to solve a number of problems. We've talked about at length the banking problem. Paying a dollar to get 95 cents, taking 5 days is not an improvement on the existing financial system, right? And having to store a bunch of private keys under your bed, also not exactly the most, clear-cut use of how we're going to get mass adoption here. And so there are a few different areas that I think are critical to know. One is having multi-signature wallets be key to this. The second is kind of like what you talked about, uh, having using new words is I think an area of crypto that is super sort of unnecessary, but also talking about certain things. Like I have people that ask me how blockchains work and want to know the deep details of how a block space market is ultimately formed and completed. And I'm like, well, do you know how the pistons work in the engine on your car, right? And what I'm getting to is what this needs to be, and ultimately, it would be impossible for cars to get adoption if we all had to be mechanics to use them, right? And so we don't need everybody to know what's underlying these things. What we need to do is re-platform the existing financial system, like Patrick was talking about, operates on the most antiquated financial infrastructure in the world on the blockchains. This is the internet of everything, and starting with money is how we unlock that, and we do it in a safe, secure way through banking. We ensure that we solve the trade-offs of crypto, where you have private keys that you put under your bed. No, we put those in a multi-signature wallet, and having customer support that you can reach out to on a day-to-day basis instantly at any time is so critical for this to scale, because people just, it's your money, right? It's your property on the internet. And so people need to feel like they have someone to talk to, like their money is in a trusted place. And there's no better place to do that than having a bank.
I want to ask, because I think, I'm always curious with the networking and how some of these relationships are established. When I went and, stumbled across this GSMA document a couple months ago, and I'm going through it. Vodafone is huge. Vodafone is like, I think 330 million mobile users, somewhere around there. How do you guys establish? Zane is pretty big too. How do you guys establish relationships like that? What do the relationships look like within like a working group? Like this. Like, I mean, there's a lot of, I guess, for context, it doesn't seem like it was just like, this is just one of those things that is thrown together. There is tons of work that has went into like a trial like this. I mean, and you have like literally network diagrams and all this crazy stuff, but like, you probably can't talk about all of it, but maybe like in broad strokes, what do these relationships look like with, some of the telcos? And yeah.
So broadly, there's the industry consortium, the GSMA, that is where all the telcos are interacting with each other and are ultimately members of this huge global consortium for this massive industry worldwide. And so there's all these different working groups that are focused on specific problems across the digital space to enable telecoms to ultimately, improve and work together as an industry to standardize things and create new initiatives that'll improve both their economies and their services. And so the entire GSMA world is one that we've been a part of for decades. Multiple members of our teams have been senior level executives all the way to founders and CEOs of major GSMA entities across fraud, across telecom. And so it's always been in our DNA as a business. Telcoin was quite literally formed to create this blockchain standard for telecoms and unlock this new type of infrastructure for money on the internet that leverages existing last mile payment connectivity with telecoms and is secure in that way and truly global. And so those relationships form over years. We became associate member of the GSMA in 2018. We've been working very closely with both the GSMA and its individual members on what does this vision look like for both mobile financial services 1.0 and then a blockchain powered mobile financial services 2.0. And what we came to was that having local stable coins across the world in each of these markets is really works well for telecoms to enable this. It's a much more suitable approach, we think, than the existing mobile money approach that uses traditional financial infrastructure and therefore suffers from the same inherent weaknesses of it. And so by uniting all of these mobile network operators through the GSMA around the same blockchain, we can effectively connect them to each other along with all of their users for money on the internet instead of using any one of the thousands of blockchains that are designed to be faster, better, cheaper. We've empowered the GSMA with ownership, shared ownership over this system.
So it's interesting. It's almost like, you potentially, solve the regulatory issue in different jurisdictions. And then you kind of, you have this kind of liquidity pool as per the diagram in this GSMA document. You
Yeah.
kind of have this liquidity pool sitting in the center of all this, and it's just like it's kind of it merges the Web 2 world almost with what we're already doing in Web 3, which is like some of the DeFi stuff, but it's like tying it back into traditional, and it's solving a big problem that exists there. So I think it's pretty interesting. I would love if either one of you gentlemen, I have a couple more questions for you here, but biggest innovation or product Telcoin's working on in the next 12 months, and if it's the bank, great, we can go through that again, because I know that's pretty huge. But yeah, biggest innovation or product within the next 12 months.
I'm going to go with the bank by far. That's been the biggest thing one of the bigger things we've been working on, and it's so innovative, and how we're going to go about getting online, getting people online, being able to transfer money in and out from the wallet, from your bank account, to issue stable coins to them in their wallets, and transferring money across the different platforms is going to be huge. I really do think that this is the best way to get everyday people who are not in crypto involved, transferring money in a safe, sound, and cost-effective manner that just has not been seen before on a big scale. I think what we're doing is just the start. Are we going to be the only one? I would be shocked if we were. But I think what you're going to see is we are probably going to be one of the first ones of many moving forward that are really going to help change. I don't want to say the crypto industry, because that's something that's constantly changing, but at the very least, the U.S. financial industry. This is going to be a huge step for the U.S. financial industry, specifically the banking industry, that I think is going to be huge. I really think once we get everything open, innovation is just going to pour through on all facets in the banking world, in the United States and globally for that matter. But right now, I would say banking's probably our biggest one. Parker, what do you think?
I think yes. So to basically dovetail on banking, it for me the bank is the ultimately the biggest thing that we've been working on at Telcoin, and we're incredibly excited about it. I think the second order effects of the products that come from that are what everyone in crypto has been hoping for decades, and acting like they're low hanging fruit when in the reality they're not, because you have governments involved, you have laws that enable you to get money into these economies and enable them to work. And so once you have the bank and you have banking on both sides of a remittance corridor, i.e., the US to Mexico, that's when things become very, very real for real world users. When you have the ability to provide USD and MXN liquidity into an on chain Forex market, earn fees from the products that you use in your daily lives, not only is it faster, better, cheaper, instant than the status quo, but it's owned by the users and they can earn the yield from the products they rely on in their daily lives. And so having this ability to showcase from A to Z a user sending money from the US to Mexico or another jurisdiction at a fraction of the cost instantly on the internet, and that terminates in the actual bank account of the user. I think that's going to be one of the most exciting things that we'll see. We've been working really hard towards what everyone called this low-hanging fruit product of cross-border money flows. And now we're actually there with real money on blockchains that's regulated. And so that's what I'm most excited about is bringing the bank to life and then enabling end-to-end on-chain remittances that will ultimately disrupt anything that the traditional sort of status quo providers can do.
I think it's huge too, generating yield for real world people for some of the things that they're really doing in their everyday lives, and that's like kind of it's been like I know in the crypto industry we're all we see a lot of this kind of verbiage that gets kind of thrown about, like leveling the playing field and democratization of finance. My fear has always been like, yeah, it's great that we're saying that, but it seems like that might not be what's happening sometimes. But whenever we see real world use cases kind of, that are actually empowering people out there in the world. And I think you guys have a huge opportunity to do that, especially in the telecom industry. How many people have cell phones that don't have access into financial, ways and means for their everyday lives? I think it'll be interesting to watch. So I wanted to thank Parker. I wanted to thank Patrick for joining today. I wanted to give heads up to the audience. If you're interested in learning more about what Telcoin is building, go to telco.in. You can learn about the ESDR aspects. You can learn about the bank that's coming in Nebraska, remittances. Here's the Norfolk Bank, and this GSMA document I still think is fascinating. I will probably use this as a reference point and more videos in the future. And make sure you give Telcoin a follow on X as well at Telcoin. Parker and Patrick, thank you so much today, and hang out with me for a couple minutes to make sure I get this recording, and hopefully we see you back again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been an awesome time.